At 66, Andrea Bocelli should be basking in legendary status. Instead, he's battling controversies that have fans questioning everything. The 2020 scandal that nearly ended his career, the family secrets finally coming to light, the shocking truth about how fame destroyed his first marriage and left him broken. Behind those dark glasses lies a story of survival that's more brutal than any opera. From a devastating childhood accident to becoming the world's most controversial tenor, what you're about to discover will shatter every assumption you've had about this icon. The real Andrea Bocelli story begins with violence that would haunt him forever. Most people know he went blind as a child, but they don't know the horrific details. Picture a 12-year-old boy, already struggling with congenital glaucoma that had stolen most of his sight, playing soccer with friends in 1970. One moment he's running across the field, the next a soccer ball slams into his fragile skull with devastating force. The impact triggered a brain hemorrhage so severe that doctors weren't sure he'd survive the night. When he finally woke up, the last traces of light in his world had vanished forever. But the physical trauma was just the beginning. The psychological damage that followed nearly destroyed him before his career even started. Andrea was shipped off to a boarding school for the blind, crammed into overcrowded dormitories with 64 other boys. He's admitted that those nights were filled with such crushing loneliness that dark thoughts consumed him. While other kids his age were discovering girls and planning their futures, he was lying awake in the darkness, wondering if life was even worth living. The only thing that kept him from completely giving up was a scratchy old recording of tenor Franco Corelli that someone had left behind. That voice became his obsession, his lifeline, and ultimately his salvation. He would play it over and over, memorizing every note, every breath, every emotion. Little did anyone know that this broken child, lying in a dormitory full of forgotten souls, was listening to his own destiny calling through the darkness. What happened next reveals just how desperate Andrea's situation really became. By the 1980s, he was living a schizophrenic existence that was slowly tearing him apart. During the day, he was Andrea the law student at the University of Pisa, forcing himself through legal textbooks he couldn't read, relying on classmates to describe every page while he memorized thousands of statutes by sound alone. The academic pressure was crushing, but it was nothing compared to what awaited him after dark. Every evening, as other students headed home to comfortable beds, Andrea would transform into someone completely different. He'd stumble through the streets to smoky piano bars filled with drunk patrons who treated him like background noise. Night after night, he'd sit behind a beaten-up piano, pouring his heart out to crowds who were more interested in their conversations than his voice. The conditions were brutal. Cigarette smoke burned his lungs. Patrons threw bottles when they didn't like a song. Some nights he'd perform for 4 hours straight and earn barely enough to buy a single meal. The irony was devastating. Here was a voice that would one day make millions weep, but back then he couldn't even get a bar full of drunks to stop talking. Those years of rejection and humiliation pushed Andrea to his breaking point multiple times. He's admitted that there were nights when he questioned everything, wondering if he was delusional to think his voice mattered. The emotional whiplash of studying law during the day while chasing musical dreams at night was slowly destroying his sanity. But those brutal piano bar years also forged something unbreakable in his character, a resilience that would carry him through every future storm. Then came 1992, and a phone call that changed everything in the most unexpected way imaginable. Italian rock star Zucchero Fornaciari needed someone to record a demo of Miserere, a song he'd written specifically for the legendary Luciano Pavarotti. Somehow, through a chain of connections that still seems too coincidental to be real, Andrea's name came up as a temporary substitute. Nobody expected anything special. This was supposed to be a placeholder recording, something to give Pavarotti an idea of the melody before the real magic happened. But when Andrea sat at that piano and opened his mouth, something extraordinary poured out. All those years of pain, all those nights of rejection, all that desperate hunger for recognition, it all came flooding through his voice in a performance that would change music history. When Pavarotti finally heard the demo, his reaction was immediate and shocking. The greatest tenor of the 20th century listened to this unknown voice and asked, "Who is this man? Why do you need me when you have him?" Those words didn't just launch Andrea's career, they validated every moment of suffering he'd endured. But here's what nobody talks about. Andrea was terrified. Years of piano bar performances hadn't prepared him for what came next. When Zucchero invited him to tour across Europe, Andrea's stage fright was so severe that he'd shake uncontrollably before every performance. He's admitted that panic attacks followed him for decades, even at the height of his fame. The world saw a rising star, but Andrea felt like an imposter who might be exposed at any moment. That terror never fully went away. Even today, behind those confident performances that move millions to tears, there's still a trace of that frightened man who once sang to empty rooms. Success came with a price tag, that destroyed everything Andrea held most dear. By 1995, when Conte Partiro exploded across Europe and Time to Say Goodbye became a global phenomenon, Andrea Bocelli was no longer just a singer. He was an international obsession. But while millions of fans were falling in love with his voice, the woman who mattered most was falling out of love with the man behind it. Andrea Bocelli had married the struggling law student she met in those smoky piano bars back in 19... She'd fallen for the vulnerable dreamer who sang with such raw emotion, not the polished superstar the world would come to worship. As Andrea's career skyrocketed, their marriage began its heartbreaking descent into silence and separation. Picture the brutal reality. Andrea serving dinner every night to an empty chair because Andrea was thousands of miles away, performing for strangers who screamed his name. She'd put their sons Amos and Matteo to bed with stories about daddy coming home soon, knowing it was a lie that hurt more each time she told it. The man who once sang only for her was now singing for everyone except her. The touring schedule was relentless. Andrea would return home exhausted, emotionally drained from giving everything to audiences around the world. He had nothing left for the family that needed him most. Andrea watched the intimate connection they'd shared get buried under contracts, interviews, and the endless demands of global fame. By 2002, their marriage was over. There were no tabloid scandals, no explosive fights, just the quiet death of a love that couldn't survive the weight of the world pressing down on it. Andrea has never spoken ill of Andrea, but you can hear the regret in his voice when he admits that fame gave him everything he dreamed of while taking away what he couldn't afford to lose. Just when it seemed like Andrea had found peace with his second wife Veronica, the 2020 pandemic unleashed a controversy that nearly destroyed his reputation overnight. In a moment of frustration that he'll probably regret forever, Andrea made comments questioning Italy's strict lockdown measures, suggesting they were overly harsh and damaging to mental health and the economy. His words weren't calculated or rehearsed. They came from a man who'd spent his entire life on stages that were suddenly empty, a performer suffocating in the silence of global shutdown. But within hours, those comments exploded across social media like a bomb. Fans who had once called him their guardian angel were now calling him reckless and tone-deaf. The backlash was savage and immediate. People who had clung to his music during their darkest moments felt betrayed by what they saw as callous disregard for public health. Critics who had always questioned his crossover success pounced on the controversy as proof that he was out of touch with reality. The same voice that had offered comfort during the pandemic's early days was now being silenced by the very people he tried to heal. Behind the headlines was a man watching his life's work crumble in real time. Andrea's family saw something the world missed, not a celebrity making political statements, but a father worried about his children's future, an artist desperate to return to the stage, a human being pushed to his breaking point by isolation and uncertainty. His response revealed the character that had carried him through every previous storm. Instead of doubling down or making excuses, Andrea admitted his mistake with the same humility he'd shown throughout his career. "I spoke out of emotion, not disrespect," he said quietly. But for many fans, the damage was done. The controversy exposed how quickly public love can turn to public judgment. While the world debated Andrea's mistakes, something beautiful was happening behind the scenes that would secure his legacy in ways no solo career ever could. His children weren't just carrying his name, they were carrying his gift into the future, creating a musical dynasty that transforms personal talent into generational permanence. Amos, born in 1995, chose a different path than expected. While the world assumed he'd follow directly in his father's footsteps, he buried himself in aerospace engineering, finding beauty in equations instead of arias. But music still calls to him. On quiet evenings at their Tuscan villa, Amos sits beside Andrea at the piano, his touch measured and steady, providing the grounding force his father sometimes needs. Then there's Matteo, born in 1997, who inherited not just Andrea's voice but his magnetic presence. Tall and charismatic, with a timbre that carries the same warmth and ache as his father's, Matteo represents the future of the Bocelli sound. When they performed Fall on Me together in 2018, the world witnessed something extraordinary, a torch being passed in real time, father and son creating harmony that transcended generations. But it's Virginia, Andrea's daughter with Veronica, who might be the most remarkable of all. Born in 2012, she stepped onto live television at age 8 and sang Hallelujah with a fearlessness that left viewers speechless. Her small voice rising alongside her father's powerful tenor created a moment of pure magic that reminded everyone why family matters more than fame. Together, these three represent Andrea's most sacred achievement, not the sold-out concerts or platinum albums, but the living proof that talent, when nurtured with love, can echo across generations. When Amos plays, when Matteo sings, when Virginia lifts her voice, the world doesn't just hear music, it hears the future of the Bocelli legacy. Today, at 66, Andrea Bocelli has built something far more valuable than a music career. He's created an empire that spans continents and generations. His primary residence, Villa Alpamare in Forte dei Marmi, overlooks the Tuscan coast where waves keep time with piano scales drifting from its windows. Just across the street sits his Alpamare Beach Club, a refined retreat that mirrors his philosophy of beauty and belonging. But the real treasure lies in his business ventures that connect his art to his roots. The Bocelli family winery, established in 1831, produces wines from the same Tuscan hills that shaped his childhood. Every bottle tells a story of tradition and perseverance, turning the soil of his past into liquid gold. The Bocelli farmhouse extends this legacy further, offering visitors a chance to walk where he walked and taste the harvest of the land that raised him. His charitable work through the Andrea Bocelli Foundation transforms applause into action, funding schools and healthcare programs across Italy, Haiti, and beyond. It's proof that his voice serves a purpose greater than entertainment. It's an instrument of healing that reaches far beyond concert halls. The calendar ahead reveals a man nowhere near ready for retirement. The 20th anniversary of Teatro del Silencio in 2025 will see him return to his hometown valley where it all began. International tours across Europe and North America prove his voice remains as powerful as ever. Most importantly, family projects continue, duets with Matteo extending his sound into the future, tender performances with Virginia proving innocence can carry hope. Andrea Bocelli's story isn't ending, it's evolving, from a blind boy in Tuscany to a global icon, from personal tragedy to artistic triumph. He's shown the world that even the deepest darkness can be transformed into light that never fades.